night of partying started with a police interaction and also ended with one. Even with neighbors watching, 911 calls galore, and fights ensuing, no one saw how this 21-year-old girl vanished. Was it the fault of the man sleeping in her home, the person she had confronted at the bar, the neighbor who had been caught videotaping her, or someone that no one had ever seen? What happened inside of that apartment that night? And was the tantrum that neighbors thought she was having really the sounds of her attack? You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke Makenna, and this case is so incredibly important. Her family has been desperately trying to get answers for the past 11 years, and I don't believe that it is too late. I think that it is still very possible for someone to come forward with information at this time. The best possible outcome would obviously be that Kortne is safe and sound, but it is very important to share her picture, to share her story, and to hopefully bring this family justice, but at the very least, some answers. So let's get into the story. So it was 2012 in Pennsylvania, and Kortne Stouffer was a 21-year-old living in Palmyra. Now, she worked as a salon/spa employee, and then she went on to be a pet groomer. But Kortne was said to be quite a free spirit. She was headstrong. She had a contagious laugh. She said whatever she wanted to say, and she spoke up for herself. She felt like she was a hippie at heart and was always wearing tie-dye clothes and loved that time period by the time she was 21. Those around her said that she had just recently adopted this style, and she seemed more at peace and just herself. And even when she was little, she was known to be this feisty little girl who would say exactly how she felt. And her family said she loved talking, she loved being the center of attention, and she grew up on a farm with animals. And she also had 5 siblings, but one of those animals was her favorite dog that she had named Sheba. And she had gotten Sheba when she was about 8 years old, and Sheba was still with them when she was 21. Now, like I said, her family said she loved being the center of attention, and in doing so, she actually loved performing, such as singing and acting, playing piano. She went in traveling groups to perform, and right after high school, where she was cheering and she was doing all sorts of sports, she also went to cosmetology school because that is what her mother did. And so she worked in a beauty salon for a little bit, and then decided she didn't like working with the public doing hair, and that's actually that's why I'm not a cosmetologist anymore, but I did go to school for it. But she actually went on to do pet grooming, and she loved this so much more because animals were so ingrained in her to just love and take care of. Her boss said that she was the best person with animals. Her parents, Scott and Wendy, adored her, and she could be different versions of herself at any point. She would, wear dresses and look like Cinderella, or she would throw mud and play with the boys outside. But one thing that they said for certain was that she was the best big sister, and little sister as well, but especially big sister, especially to her youngest brother, because she was actually more of a second mom to him. At the point of being 21, he was about 5 years old, and they would do so much together. She would even keep popsicles in her fridge for him to be able to come over and always know they would be there. But he didn't get much time with her because at only 5 years old, his sister vanished. At 21, Kortne had an apartment with her and her boyfriend, who is 19-year-old, 20-year-old Brad Hare. And this was at 810 West Main Street. Brad was said to be the complete opposite of Kortne. He was more shy, more introverted, and she was completely in love with him. It was her first love, and they were very happy. She took her childhood dog Sheba with her to the apartment, was doing everything to take care of her, would often take her on walks, and really took this dog everywhere with her. I mean, if she just went down the street, the dog was coming with her. She went in her car, the dog was coming with her. That was just a dog that she felt like was her best friend. And this was a time when Kortne was being exactly who she wanted to be, and she was being this fun young person who didn't have too much responsibility and wasn't taking life too seriously. This new home gave her the opportunity to invite friends over, which was wonderful for her, but wasn't always the best thing as far as in the neighbors' eyes. You see, on July 28th of 2012, Brad and Kortne had a house party with some of their friends. There was a lot of drinking going on that night, and the main reason that they decided to have a party there was actually that her boyfriend Brad was on house arrest because he was on probation for a DUI that had occurred, and he wasn't supposed to be drinking at all. But by 9 p.m., the party was actually broken up by police because they had been called to the residence. Now, Palmyra police and Lebanon County Adult Probation went inside the apartment and they actually arrested Brad for violating his probation. And they would also find 7 other people inside, and Kortne was the only one that was of age to drink. So all of these other underage people, they either fled or 2 of them were cited for underage drinking, but they were released. As they took Brad into custody, Kortne was left alone inside of her apartment, and it turned out that she didn't know this at the time, but one of their neighbors, a man named Todd Saksek, had the probation department come. He had called, he had seen people carrying beer into the residence, knew that Brad was on probation, knew that they were quite young, and also that they were being loud, and he went ahead and called on them. When Kortne was alone, she ended up calling her mother because she was so scared that her boyfriend would be going to jail for a long time. She thought that the rest of his 4-year probation he would have to be in jail for. And her mother, Wendy, was asking her if she wanted to come over, if that would make her feel more comfortable, and she said that she didn't want to. She didn't really feel like it, and instead, an hour later at around 10:07 p.m., Kortne actually reached out to one of her friends, a 29-year-old man named Cody Pruitt. Now, she ended up hanging out with Cody and Cody's friend Milton Rodriguez Jr. They said that they were going to the gas station bar there in town, and she could join them if she wanted. And even though she was upset by what happened with her boyfriend, what had occurred, her possible neighbors being the reason for it, and she had a lot of unknowns as far as the future, she wanted to go and kind of let off some steam and kind of get out of her own head. And so she decided to drive to the bar in Hummelstown and meet up with some of the friends. She was said to begin to drink very heavily at this point, and after a few hours, the group decided to head to another bar, which was in Harrisburg, about 20 minutes away, which was said to be more of the bar crawling scene, had much more to do. And so Kortne decided to leave her car at the first bar, the gas station bar, and ride with Cody and Milton. Now, they were riding in Milton's car, but Cody was actually driving because he was the designated driver and was not drinking that night. So, Milton and Kortne could drink and he would drive them around. It was said to be the 3 of them, and they arrived at the hardware bar and went inside to do some more drinking. However, around 1:50 a.m., so it was now July 29th, Kortne was said to get into a verbal fight with some people who were also at the bar. They were apparently acquaintances of Kortne. She didn't know them that well, but this is a man named Arvard Brown, and Kortne was saying that she believed he had broken into her apartment and stolen money a few months prior to this altercation. Due to this, it got so rambunctious that Kortne was actually asked to leave the bar. She was kicked out, and so she was forced to separate with Cody and Milton, her friends, and it was unknown, what she did around this time, who she saw, but she ultimately texted Cody and said that she needed a ride and she needed to go home because they were her only ride. So they would all leave the hardware bar and they stopped at a pizza shop for some food. So by 2:45 a.m., the group had driven back to Palmyra where they all lived. Milton was dropped off. Even though it was his car, he was still drinking and very drunk, so he was dropped off at his house. And then Kortne asked Cody if she could actually be taken back to her car. She felt like she was safe enough to drive home, and so that is what Cody would do. So when Kortne got in her car, was driving home, Cody was said to be following behind in his car to make sure that everything was okay. By 3 a.m., they both made it to Kortne's apartment and they headed inside, and that is when Kortne was said to get into another verbal altercation. You see, she spotted some of her neighbors that lived directly around her, who she was beginning to believe had called the police earlier that day and gotten her boyfriend arrested. She was very angry for this, and she came face to face with the man who is allegedly the one who called, Todd, as well as 2 of her other neighbors who I believe lived below her, named Janice and Rick. They were a couple. So at 3:12 a.m., the second 911 call was placed, and this time it was by the neighbor Rick, who called 911 to tell them that Kortne was making threats against him. Rick claimed that at that point she'd gone into her apartment with a guy who she was with who was also causing problems. Now, 3 minutes later, the Palmyra police had arrived, and the neighbor Todd came to tell them that Kortne was also yelling at him and had kicked him in the leg, and other neighbors were saying that Kortne was being too loud. And Kortne was questioned at this point, and she claimed that she just went out to take her dog on a walk and that the neighbors were yelling at her. And so Kortne and Todd were having this screaming match in front of the police, and ultimately the police believed that everyone was just drunk, and so they forced everyone to separate, sent them back to their apartments, and told them that they needed to basically get it together. But at 3:49 a.m., the police would leave, saying that everything was handled, only to be called back 22 minutes later. So at 4:11 a.m., the police were called once again, and the neighbor who had called about the party at the beginning of the night was calling again. This was Todd, who claimed that Kortne was now screaming through the walls, stomping on the floor, slamming the doors, and that the threats hadn't stopped. This time, though, it took police 20 minutes to arrive. It's not really known why, if they were dealing with something else, if they didn't have anyone in that area by that time, but it was also known that they were obtaining other jurisdictions of police officers to come and help with the situation. But Todd would meet them outside around 4:31 a.m., saying that Kortne hadn't stopped her fit and that she did this often to annoy the neighbors. It was something common. However, when police made it to her apartment door, it was quiet and it was dark inside, and when they knocked, they got no response at all. They ended up looking through her patio door as well as a window and didn't see anything strange or any sort of movement, but they did know that Kortne's dog was barking on the inside when they would knock and then would just stop. Now, they believed that Kortne had gone to sleep at this time and that there was no longer a need to control the situation. They didn't want to, kick the hornet's nest, is what they would describe it as later, and cause a further disruption when it finally had ended. So for the third time that night, they left the scene. This was the first time, though, that they hadn't spoken or seen Kortne. There would be no more calls from the apartment to the police that night. The apartment complex was said to be able to sleep peacefully after that, though since it was already 5 in the morning, there wasn't much night to sleep. And the neighbor Todd was said to get about 2 or 3 hours of sleep before he went into the police department around 7:30 a.m. He wanted to go down after he woke up first thing to make a formal complaint and to also press charges against Kortne for kicking him. Now, the police believe that they were done with the situation from the night before, but that was the complete opposite of the truth. And Kortne had plans to actually meet with her older brother at the county fair that was happening that Sunday. So the day that everyone was, waking up from the chaos of the night before, she was supposed to go and meet him. It was something that they did annually, but she never actually showed. Now, he went on to be with other friends, family members, but he did find it quite strange, and for the rest of the day, no one was able to get a hold of her. This wasn't like Kortne at all to not apologize if she couldn't come, and that next morning, Kortne's mother woke up with a very uneasy feeling, and she called her son to ask if Kortne had showed up, and when he said no, she immediately went over to Kortne's apartment to speak with her and to make sure she was okay. But she found that the front door was unlocked and open, and that Sheba was inside barking. Her mother knew that when she saw the dog, something was very wrong because Kortne wasn't there, and Kortne took this dog everywhere she went. Her car was also still in the parking lot, had the windows rolled down, and inside she would see Kortne's keys, cell phone, and purse exactly where she would always keep them. There was nothing out of place, no blood, no sign of a struggle, nothing. Though her dog hadn't been outside to use the bathroom in quite a while because he had went to the bathroom on the floor, and that's not something that Sheba would often do. Her phone was still plugged into the wall next to her bed, and she had 18 missed calls. And so her mother, and then she ended up calling Kortne's father. They were divorced by this time, but they ended up going through this phone and calling anyone who had last contacted her to see if they knew where she was, and none of her friends claimed to know where she had gone. By 2:42 on July 30th, Kortne was officially reported missing by her father, and her friends and family began to search right away in the areas around her apartment, and they were actually staying in her apartment in case she did come home. But missing persons posters were distributed everywhere, and a $5,000 reward was offered from her father for information.
Told that they were called to her house for noise disturbance, and that they had talked to Kortne and to the neighbors, and that they were all told to go back into their apartments and leave each other alone. As far as we know, they went back to her apartment and they didn't see anybody or hear anybody. All the lights were off. They knocked on the doors and they left.
But what about that friend that went back to Kortne's residence with her that night? Well, Cody Pruitt was questioned, by this time mainly by Kortne's father, and he would say that he did follow her back to the apartment because he was worried since she had been drinking and, had the issues with her neighbors prior, but he said he stayed the night. He was trying to calm her down. He watched her stomping on the floor and yelling before they went to bed, but then he claimed that they did end up going to sleep, and that when he woke up around 7:56 a.m. he didn't see her. She wasn't next to him. She wasn't anywhere in the house. He kind of called out to her saying that he was going to leave, and then he went on to a convenience store where he would text her, "Hey, what happened to you?" And then he would head over to Milton's house to drop off Milton's car, and then Milton would drive him to his house. And by that time, Kortne still hadn't answered him. So throughout the day, he texted her around 2 more times, but she still wasn't responding.
Scott has talked to him, the police have talked to him, and he said that there was no argument.
Well, there was no argument between him and my daughter. There was an argument between my daughter and the neighbors when they came home that morning, approximately it's about 3:20 a.m. when they got home, and she had gotten into an argument with the neighbors.
He told Scott that he sleeps like a rock, and so he didn't hear anything that night, but he wouldn't have. Now, the surveillance footage at the convenience store confirmed that part of the story. He was there at the time that he said that he was, but when Scott was asked by others if he believed Cody and his story, he said he wanted to believe him.
Well, I really just wanted to hear it from, his words. I'd never had a chance to meet Cody to that point, and I really wanted to hear from his side exactly what went on.
Did you buy it?
That's a tough question. I want to believe him. I want to see that my daughter's brought home. I want to try and not have someone else brought into this that isn't a guilty party. I want to say I'd like to believe him, but it's difficult. And I asked him the same question, because he as well has family members. I said, what if I was the last person that was with one of your family members, and that was the last time you ever saw them? What would you think of me?
And Cody allegedly would take a polygraph test from police, and he also offered his DNA. So Scott then went to Cody and Kortne's friend Milton, and Milton didn't want to say much to him, but police would go and search Cody and Milton's cars and homes, believing that this could have been a kidnapping. However, they found no evidence.
How is it possible that when police go to the apartment the second time, nobody answers the door? If he slept over, he should have been there and should have been able to answer the door.
They are not persons of interest. They are not suspects. But we understand they are cooperating, which means there's no reason for police to call them suspects or persons of interest because they are cooperating. And by coming out and calling them that will make them clam up and lawyer up. But police do believe each of these men has valuable information. That's why they've now executed 2 search warrants with these men and the cars.
Her mother ended up putting on a candlelight vigil right outside the police station to make sure that they did not forget about her. 9 days since she had been reported missing and 11 days since she had last been seen, a ground search was conducted with canines. And the next day, a forensic team was actually brought into her apartment and to the neighbors' apartments for possible evidence that they could find. It was declared a crime scene. Crime scene tape was posted, and the missing persons posters and news reports describes Kortne as a white female standing at 5'8", around 115 to 120 pounds, with blonde, long hair and green eyes. She has a mole on her right cheek and her ear, and her tongue is pierced. She has multiple tattoos, such as the word "One Love" on her right arm, 3 stars on her foot, and a pistol shooting flowers on her left side. She was believed to be wearing a yellow tank top, black floral print or paint-splattered shorts, and she was wearing a class ring that was silver and a diamond wedding ring, and her hair was in dreadlocks. Now, these posters said that foul play was suspected in her disappearance. Now, neighbors below Kortne's apartment, so Janice and Rick, were questioned, and they claimed that they didn't know anything. In fact, they said that they believed that maybe she left her apartment that night and something happened elsewhere. Then the neighbor, Todd, who was the one who called the most, claimed that she was very troublesome. and he didn't know what happened. But Kortne's parents claimed that Todd would never look them in the eyes when talking to them, and then they watched as he took out multiple bags of trash. However, police allegedly searched every bag and searched his home and found nothing of concern. It was believed that the entire night Kortne was furious about her neighbors continually calling the police on her, and her father Scott believed that the police had a chance to possibly save her that last time that they were called to the apartment and nobody answered the door. Instead, they left, but Scott said he wasn't going to sue anybody because that's not what they're about. They just want answers. Her parents claimed that they didn't love all of her friends that she surrounded herself with all the time. They also knew that Cody, the man who had been in her apartment, had a crush on Kortne, but Kortne didn't really want to reciprocate the feelings. But they also knew that Kortne felt odd about one of her neighbors, that she had mentioned this single guy living in her apartment building that was very strange, and that they were always fighting with each other about neighborly things. And then a month before she disappeared, she called her mom and said that this man was videotaping her while she was outside. This was none other than Todd. The night that Kortne disappeared, Todd was also found to have called the landlord, left a voicemail saying that if they didn't do something about her and removing her from the apartment, he would. Was this a threat made in anger or a promise? Now, Kortne's boyfriend, Brad, he would have been the prime suspect in all of this. They lived together. However, he had the strongest alibi because he had been arrested. He was in custody at the time during all of this. And that is the reason that Kortne really was at the bars that night, and that she was so angered and was in fear that he was going to be in jail for such a long time. And it turned out that he was only arrested for a few days and he was released after that. But when they tried to talk to him about Kortne, he was said to be very uncooperative, though it was said that this was mostly because he just didn't respect or like to talk to law enforcement in general. Another strange part of the timeline was the fact that Kortne had gotten into that argument at the bar, and she had accused this man of breaking into her home, stealing her money, ransacking her home, and it was discovered that the man she argued with, Arvard Brown, was actually a well-known drug dealer. And she had also named him to her mother as the burglar when she came home and found her home like that. Now, as far as the drug dealing part, it was known that Kortne smoked marijuana, but it was unknown if she did anything further than that, if that is how they knew each other. And it was found, though, that Arvard was friends with Cody and Milton. When investigators questioned Arvard, he said that after Kortne had yelled at them, he and his girlfriend had just gone home and that they had never stolen anything from her apartment like she accused them of. Every possible answer turned out to be a dead end, or at least have no evidence to prove it further. And so for 2 years, no one knew what happened to Kortne until a very promising tip came in March of 2014. Now, a woman named Amanda Ballister asked to meet with Kortne's father, Scott. She told him that she had once overheard a conversation with two men that concerned her. She said they said that Kortne was killed by acquaintances who came to her apartment to steal the marijuana and the money. That she was ultimately killed, wrapped in a carpet, and then taken to Memorial Lake, where she was weighed down and thrown in. Memorial Lake was 12 miles from her home, and state police decided to search the water with sonar cameras, but didn't find anything. And then a volunteer diver did the same and also came up empty-handed. It was found, though, that this witness, Amanda, changed her story 3 times, and she also claimed she was friends with Kortne, even though none of Kortne's actual friends said that Kortne knew this woman. Now, the reward for information is now $100,000, and her family has created a nonprofit with tie-dye clothing called Kortne Remember Me. They have a Facebook page. They do lots of different events to keep her story alive. I don't think that they're actually selling the t-shirts at this point, but I will leave links to all of their pages down below so you can keep up with that if you would like to support. They have an annual Remember Me float on the creek.
If it gets a little bit more distant, it's still a reality. Every day you wake up and you feel like, have I done enough? Have I not done enough? And then you get into the period of 2 years. In between that, you're dealing with her things, because obviously there's things about her personal life you have to try and tie up or find a way to put them in a containment area or freeze for a little while. And you deal with a lot of different emotions with your children. You see the hurt they're going through, the confusion. It's not a reality, and then it starts becoming more of a reality. 3 years into it now, you know, it's just like every day is a thought about my daughter, you know. every day. There's not something. I might not show it the way a lot of other people do, because I don't have that luxury. You know, I have to stay focused as much as I can for a lot of people, as well as myself. Have hope every day. And I've never lost hope that we're not going to see her walk through the door, or have someone call us and say, we think we might have found your daughter. We want closure, but of course, in half of that scenario with closure comes death, and then the reality of dealing with that. But in the other half of not having closure comes hope that she is still out there, and you can have the 50% of the closure that comes with finding her.
And last year, for the 10-year anniversary of her disappearance, her family ended up putting together this documentary interview of sorts where they called it I Am Kortne, and they talked about who she was.
And I am Kortne Stouffer's mom. We used to take all the kids down to a meadow on our 10-acre farm, and we used to camp every weekend in the summer. The kids used to play in the creek, get muddy, get dirty. She loved playing with Big Brother and riding four-wheelers. I remember when Kortne started singing around the house. She was really little. I'm really, really overprotective, even more than I was with my kids and my grandkids. I'm really sad that she could never meet the grandkids. There's her niece and nephew. There's 4 of them, and they didn't get a chance to meet her. But that kind of pain puts you in a place that sometimes that day you can't get out of. And thank God for family and friends and my kids and my grandkids and my husband. We have good memories, and that's what keeps us going. After all these years, it's been almost 10 years, and we need some relief. We need some act of God to help us find her.
They refused to give up on her. Her best friend Morgan talked about how she actually had a picture of Kortne that was carried down the aisle at her wedding. Her brother Austin said that she was the reason that he was an artist when he was younger, and that he was only 13 when she went missing. Her sister Kirsten said that she can hear Kortne's laugh sometimes when funny things happen.
That's one thing I really hold on to, because no matter how much time passes, I'll never forget the sound of her laugh, or the sound of her singing and just her loud obnoxiousness. She was just a really wonderful soul. I just miss her a lot. I miss her every day. One of the things that I got from her in life and that I really love now is definitely like just being out in nature and being in the wilderness. She would take me to just like the scenic overlooks, and they were just so beautiful. A lot of times we'll go do that in memory of her, because that would just be something that she would love.
But there has been some criminal activity between some of the people involved. We can't really call them even suspects, but some of the people involved in that night. There have been some criminal activity since then, because Arvid Brown, the man Kortne argued with that night, who allegedly broke into her apartment, was sentenced to prison in 2016. He had been caught with 3 other men robbing a house in Grantville, which was only 11 minutes away from Palmyra, where Kortne lived. And this was the same year of her disappearance, only 3 months later. Arvid Brown and his 3 friends, Todd Klein, Kyle Mayer, and Jacob Walsh, were masked, and they entered a home with guns pointed at a woman and her 9-year-old child. They kept the victims in bed, and they ransacked the home. They were caught and sentenced 4 years later. 3 received 5 to 10 years in prison, while the other received 3 to 6. This was an eerily similar charge to what Kortne believed Arvid had done to her. But that wasn't the only charge, because Milton Rodriguez Jr., the friend of Cody who had gone to the bar with Cody and Kortne that night, has also been charged. In 2017, he was sentenced to 2 years probation and $600 for criminal trespass, terroristic threats, and simple assault, which is an act to arouse fear in a victim, but doesn't have to involve physical contact. Also that year, Investigation Discovery covered this case in their Disappearance series, and although her case happened so long ago, it is not cold. The investigation continues to be active with federal and state law enforcement, as well as the family's private investigator named Leah Hopewell. Due to this, though, the polygraph tests of the certain people involved can't be released yet because it's an ongoing investigation, so there possibly is more in this case that we don't know about yet. Her parents have said that they're not looking for an eye, they just want to know where she is. They have continued to make her story known and will continue to do so until the person responsible comes forward. They believe that somebody knows something, somebody saw something, and you have to come forward if that is you. I will leave some numbers if you need to get in contact and leave some information. Now, I'm not going to go into a ton of theories because I think at this point, the theories aren't really going to help more than just sharing her photo and really putting pressure on the person who needs to come forward, whether that's a witness or the actual killer or abductor. But one theory about that night is that when the 911 calls were placed and Kortne was stomping on the floor, said to be throwing a tantrum and yelling, some people have said maybe that was Kortne not trying to make the neighbors mad. Maybe she was being attacked. That was a sign of the struggle or her being kidnapped or killed during that time. Because if you remember, when the police arrived right after that, her apartment was dark. She was completely quiet. Nobody answered. Nobody saw her. And then the police left. Was nobody in that home by that time? And if so, whatever happened to Cody? Was he just asleep like a rock, like he said, and didn't know anything? Had whatever happened to Kortne that night already occurred when the third police call was made? Her family deserves to know what happened, and Kortne deserves the peace that she gave to this world while she was here, and hopefully while she is still here. Because there is no evidence that she is deceased, and so I love that we can keep that hope up that she is still out there somewhere and can be reunited with her family. The truth will come out eventually, and I truly have to believe that, whether that's the person who is responsible comes forward or it's uncovered. Answers will be given to this grieving family. So whomever is keeping secrets better come forward now. She would be 32 years old this year, and her dog Sheba actually passed away only a year after she had vanished. Many have said if only Sheba could have told us what occurred that night. What did she have to witness happen to her mother? Like I said, instead of just theorizing and pointing fingers at people who are already named, let's make sure we are sharing the facts, sharing her missing persons photo, her timeline, her story, to truly get the people responsible or the people who know something to give it up. It could be someone that we know had contact with her that night, or it could be someone that no one has ever seen. But for Kortne and her family, let's demand that the truth be uncovered and let them know that they have so much support. They have people who are rooting for them, who are rooting for Kortne. If you know anything, whether it is something so small, whether you saw something but you're not sure about it, if you've heard something, it is important to call these in. You will not get in trouble because it's been so long. I guarantee you everybody involved will just be happy that you are finally coming forward with anything like that. If you are the person responsible, just come forward. Give this family a break. If it was you that hurt, harmed, or killed this 21-year-old girl, the least that you can do is let her family know what occurred or where their daughter is. Please send so much love to the Stouffer family and to Kortne. And don't forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.